Just wanted to say thank you to the previous sponsors and panelists. It was really interesting understanding more about what you guys do. My name is Chris Silipanidakis. There is no test at the end of this to pronounce or spell my last name. Don't worry about that. I am a senior solutions architect for the West. I live in San Jose, California. I've had the pleasure of talking with customers about how to implement and integrate Nasuni into modernizing their unstructured footprint. Who I've also got joined with me today, I'm really happy about, is Jim Little, our Chief Innovation Officer. Jim has the responsibility and the joy of talking to many of our customers around their AI strategy and incorporating a unified repository within that to be able to take advantage of AI. Jim is going to jump into the conversation. I've curated some questions from my experience in the field, specifically over the past year, as we've had conversations with customers about how they plan on integrating AI into their enterprise. So first and foremost, I'm not going to go into a spiel on what Nasuni is, other than Nasuni is a hybrid cloud platform that consolidates file data. So essentially, our customers tell us that Nasuni allows them to be fit from the edge all the way into AI. And having a fit for AI architecture essentially means it needs to be ubiquitous, it needs to be extensible, and at the end of the day, build something like a Snowflake for a data repository or any type of data warehouse. What Jim's going to help us understand is how that relates to unstructured data. Now, knowing what Nasuni does, there are some things that our customers have told us in regards to, identifying silos of information. So what I'm sharing here is basically the layers of the cake that make the Nasuni solution work. One of the major components of our value for our customers is finding out where those silos of unstructured data are today. The reason being is Jim is going to help us understand, because I've got some questions where he's going to provide some good answers, I'm hoping, around why it's not a good idea to leave your data where it is. If it's locked in a location where we can't gain value out of it, how are we going to be able to do that? By doing that, we can centralize and consolidate. As you can see here from a Nasuni perspective, we are multi-cloud. What that basically means is we want to consolidate, centralize, and build a single global namespace for all of your unstructured data, where that object store repository is extensible, highly available, elastic, and provides all the resiliency and security that you need. But the best part about it is the first step to being fit for AI is centralizing that data into a repository where you can gain insights for those AI and ML services. So as we layer the cake with Nasuni, one of the major components in the platform component and built-in services area is we essentially allow that unified repository to be a single global namespace that allows you to ingest all of the data sets that are sitting on siloed forms of traditional file storage on-prem, right? That's not truly cloud native, and you're not going to be able to be extensible in a hardware infrastructure-based environment. So how can we take that data, migrate it, make it the last migration you'll ever do into the specific object store of your choice with low-cost online object store tiers for the location of that data? Some other incorporated items that we have as part of this services platform that sits in front of that object storage is we have the ability to protect your data. So, we can allow recoveries to occur within seconds because we're recovering off of a file system that was designed to scale on object storage, which is an online form of a storage service in the cloud. So no longer do you have to go to an offsite backup, rehydrate that data to basically ensure a resilient data posture when it comes to incorporating data protection, but more importantly, ransomware at the edge. And that's some of the capabilities that we have as well. As you're consolidating data, you need to protect it. You need to look for gaps in your data protection strategy. And that's what we've done at Nasuni. Finally, it's about caching the data at the edge. And the comment I made earlier from the edge to AI, we have these edge appliances that are SaaS-based virtual machines that replace a fully populated storage array on-prem. And what we can do with that is that's where all the ingest of the data occurs. It can be on-prem, it can be in the cloud. We're going to ingest that data. And what we're doing to feed the AI framework that Trellix and other technologies can feed off of the repository of data. We are not an LLM, ladies and gentlemen, but what we are is your first step in consolidating and building a repository that allows you to build an on-demand distribution for all of the AI ML services that you are going to connect into Nasuni. So before I bring Jim into the conversation, Jim, I've been having some conversations with customers over the past year specifically, and I'm going to share with you a couple of the most popular use cases I'm hearing from customers, not from the perspective of how Nasuni can fix it per se, but how do I even figure out how to build a framework for the following? So the first is, we hear a lot from customers around, hey, I want to be able to search in the cloud. I want to be able to have an LLM like Lex or Copilot or Bedrock, any cloud connector. I want better visibility into my data set. So that's one use case I hear all the time. The second use case is, I know that AI is available to the consumer, but I work in the enterprise. How am I able to bring the benefits of AI and specifically Gen AI into the enterprise by automating tasks, but do it in a way where I can bring in my proprietary file data to feed into those models? So Jim, I wanted to preface that because one of the first questions I have for you is a two-part question. Obviously, I would love for you to introduce yourself to the webinar here, but I'm going to jump right in the interest of time. This is a two-part question, Jim. So to start, maybe you can help us understand the baseline difference between structured and unstructured data, because believe it or not, I've got customers in the enterprise that still have some confusion around that, but more so from the specificity of how that unstructured data is challenging the enterprise right now with just the sheer amount of data they have to manage.
Yeah, sure. So hello, everyone. Happy to be here. My name's Jim Little, as Chris said. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for Nasuni. What that role involves is working with customers, working with our product teams from an innovation perspective, but also working internally at Nasuni, often facing the same challenges that our customers have about using AI internally. So Chris, going back to kind of your question, let's talk a little about unstructured data. It's a good question. And I think the first thing I'd probably say is we have this impression that all of our customers are very AI savvy, and that's not the case in my experience. Not every customer is AI savvy, and they've got a business to run, they've got things that they do within their business, and AI can feed into that, but it's not the be all and end all for them. In terms of structured and unstructured data, it's reasonably well known, but as you say, there are two very different ways in which information is organized and stored and ultimately processed. I think the enterprise has a good handle on structured data. It's been around a long time. It's been processed for a long time. And it's basically data that has a very strict predefined format. So things like CSV files, Parquet files, SQL databases, all of those have really strict predefined formats that can be leveraged from a variety of solutions, such as the Snowflake you talked about, or Databricks, or Microsoft Fabric, or OneLake, or any of those types of solutions. Unstructured data, on the other hand, is a little different because it refers really to information that lacks a predefined format. So it's always in the past made it difficult to extract any value from that. And, classic examples are emails and text messages and Word documents and PDFs and all the type of information that we know that people want to leverage with AI and Gen AI. The best way I think about it is, if you have a kitchen and you've got a drawer in your kitchen and it's got all your utensils in it, and you've got your knives and your forks and your spoons, that's all your structured data because it's all organized in a very structured way. If you have another drawer where you just throw everything into it, that doesn't fit in that structured format. Like me, you'll have a very messy drawer with all sorts of things inside of it. That's kind of your unstructured data, if you like. But there's a middle ground that, you didn't ask me in the question, but there is a middle ground, and it's semi-structured data. And
Mm.
semi-structured data, these assets really have an internal structure. They have organized metadata, but the format is proprietary, and it's often not publicly documented. And the content often contains both structured and unstructured elements. And it's important because when you get down to the types of assets that the enterprise wants to be able to leverage with GenAI, sometimes some of those semi-structured data assets present challenges by the very nature of not being documented, and not being able to get the content out. And I'm thinking of things like, AutoCAD files and Adobe files. You know, loads of enterprises use those, but typically when you look at anybody using GenAI, they're not typically the type of assets that are going to get hoovered up. So it's important to set some context around that. In context of your next question, the scale. Well, you're right to bring up the scale because obviously over time, unstructured data has grown, really, really fast. It's ended up being inside the enterprise what Gartner calls dark data, because it kind of gets hoovered up. It's used for like 30, 60 days, and then it kind of goes dark, and you don't really get any value from it. I speak with a lot of analysts, and today in 2025, analysts are estimating that there's around 160 to 180 zettabytes of unstructured data in the enterprise. That's zettabytes, not petabytes. And ultimately, unstructured data is about 80 to 90% of all enterprise data, and it's growing at around 80 to 85% per annum. So the scale problem is huge. And actually, that brings us all the way back around to what you were talking about at the very beginning about Nasuni in some ways. Because of that scale, traditional file storage isn't the right approach to meet that, growing demand. It's just not. And I think we've already seen companies looking at ways at which they can leverage other technologies to be able to handle the scale of the unstructured data assets that continue to grow. Object storage obviously is a good way to think about that, because it can scale, pretty much limitlessly because of the way it was designed. So things like Azure Blob or Amazon S3, and it has a lot of advantages for unstructured data. I think it's virtually unlimited scalability. It costs less per terabyte than your traditional file system. It's got better metadata capabilities, so you can search it. Back to your initial question, you can search it more easily. And it has built-in durability through the fact that it's redundant and immutable. But it's not a file system at the end of the day. And it's not a file system that people are used to if they're using something like an on-premise NAS, for example, or Windows filers. Or it's not in the format that applications expect to receive it. And as you know, Chris, at Nasuni, we believe the ideal approach combines the object storage economics that I've just talked about with the file system usability that you get through our kind of cloud native hybrid file services. The ability to store that data as object, but to leverage it at file, at scale.
Yep.
And as you say, we store those objects in the global file namespace. We have intelligent software edge devices that makes the data locally as file at speed. So where data has gravity, where users expect to access it with no latency, where applications need to access it at no latency as file. And really the Nasuni platform leverages the object storage's scalability, but it still provides that familiar file access and collaboration that company employees are still after.
Yeah,
Hopefully
wonderful.
that answers
That's
those questions.
That's great, Jim. Yeah, I mean, every time we chat, I'm fascinated with the way you've been able to identify some of the gaps that we have with our customers, specifically from just a raw data capacity perspective when it comes to managing unstructured data in a unified data repository like Nasuni. I have this point that I want to make that aligns exactly with what you said. I run analyses within customers' existing storage footprints of last access date, last creation date, last modified date. Jim, you could not be more spot on. Even though the analysis comes back and tells us that 90% of your data is unstructured in your enterprise, of which 90% hasn't been touched for a year or longer. Okay, it doesn't mean that the data still isn't valuable. What it means is we should place that data into a unified repository that has the cost economics and the scalability of object storage, and allow the Nasuni services to sit in front of that to build that enterprise capability that we've been discussing for the value. So, taking raw unstructured data, extracting the value out of it, and pulling out the metadata, that's one of the components of what we can provide for customers that leverage AI on a Nasuni model. So super awesome information that you've provided to us, and kind of at the innovation level aligns with what I've seen with customers looking to deploy AI in their environment today. So speaking of deploying AI in environments, I still see some hesitation. I still see customers kind of thinking that it's a good idea, but they really don't understand how to get started, because I think there is a huge gap, Jim, with what you're describing around they know where they want to be, but they don't know how to get started. So what do you believe, in your experience talking to our customers and preparing them to be fit for AI, what are the things that are holding our customers back with using their company data? And what are some of the things they need to do to get a better handle on that data? I know it's a two-part question, but essentially, why do you think they're being held back by leveraging their own data in their own enterprise? And then, what do you think they need to do to get a handle on that?
Yeah, again, both, very good questions, and probably would take us longer than the summation of the time we've got to go through them in a lot of detail. But
couple zingers. Yep.
if you look at current approaches that most organizations have, often the problem is that their file data is in a traditional NAS or Windows filer. And
Yep.
not only is it in a traditional NAS or Windows filer, it's in that across many regions, all of which are siloed, all of which are isolated. So you get this isolated islands of storage, and if you want to start to join some of that stuff up, you have to start thinking about complex replication, management, how you
Yep.
organize the data, how do you make it globally accessible? And then you ask yourself the question, well, why do you want to make it globally accessible? What's wrong with silos and islands? Well, if you look at even collaboration between companies, having information from different pieces of the project in different places, because different teams are working on it, having that data available in one cohesive block, you want that anyway, even without AI, to be honest with you. And we have a lot of customers come to us because they want that, even without thinking about AI. But when you start to think about what AI wants, it lives on data. It wants data to have context. And if you start doing things like retrieval augmented generation, which is to make your data available to the AI system so that it can then leverage it to give you better contextual answers, you need the data joined up. So at some point, you're going to have to tackle that, to be honest. And that's the incumbent problem that many companies have. It's that fear of moving forward and actually tackling that issue. But it's the difference between having a solid, unstructured file data foundation and not having a solid unstructured file data foundation. And even if you knock off some small AI use cases by leaving them in their fragmented state, at some point you're going to end up with a project where you need to bring them, back together again. And if you go look at what Nasuni provides, we provide that hybrid implementation. We centralize all the data in the cloud object storage. Therefore, you get rid of the scaling problem because it's kind of infinite scale. We make them available as files, just like you used to have them. They're all cached, so they're all really fast. You can get access to any region through, one interface. AI can get access to any region through one interface. So it removes one of the most significant barriers that really holds companies back today. And that's having a solid data foundation that future-proofs the AI strategy and gives them data unification and accessibility to their data. As you know, we have a fit for AI methodology, which is what we talk customers through as to how to get there. And this is the framework. Obviously, there's a lot of detail behind this framework. But this is the framework that we step customers through. And this framework is really around, you've got to do an assessment. You've got to understand your data estate. You'd be surprised at how many people we speak to and companies we speak to, that probably you do more than me in that sense, that don't have a good understanding of their data estate. And particularly when, a lot of the companies Nasuni deals with, they're multinational companies, multi-geography, multi-location, and actually they do a lot of acquisitions. So having a handle on the data sets that they've got actually is pretty hard. So as you know, at that layer, we do a data assessment, but we also do a business value assessment, which is if we're going to think about having that data available within side of, your object storage cloud of choice and managed by Nasuni, it's got to make economic sense as well as making, technical sense to do it that way. So we'll go through both of those things at that stage, and we've got a whole methodology behind that, how we do it. And if all that stacks up, then we speak to the company about consolidating their silos, which sounds kind of scary, but it isn't. We've been doing that for a long, long time. As you know, we make that painless. We have technology that actually gets you started from day one. And the migration works in the background, but you start using that from a Nasuni perspective in the global namespace from day one.
Yeah.
And that itself actually, again, that's the really big step to move forward. You get everything into the global namespace. Then we do some security assessment. Why do we do the security assessment? Lots of reasons. You're going to want to re-review your ACLs, your RBAC controls. You're also going to want to understand your security gates. We also talk about doing like an AI assessment at that point. How are you going to use the data? What are the use cases? Some of the things we heard about earlier, such as model poisoning and some of the workflows that can happen. All of that stuff needs to be re-looked at depending on what the use case is and how you're making the data available and what the security gates are. And then you've got the curation of the data. So you've got all the data moved, as part of their assessment, you might have archived something off, you might not have. But at some point, you'll want to curate the data, because if you don't curate the data and you start making it available in any form to AI systems, or for inference, or however you make that available, you'll want to make sure that the data you're giving it is clean data. And what I mean by that is it doesn't have any PHI or PII in the data set. You're not going to fall foul of like HIPAA or GDPR in the EU or CCPA in California. You're also going to want to make sure that that data set hasn't got old versions hanging around with it, unless you have a use case for that in terms of how you're doing your inference. Because if you put that into a RAG model and then it's going to go and do some cosine similarity matching, it might well choose an old version and give you some information that's wrong or invalid. So there's a curation exercise. We have our Nasuni IQ product that's able to interrogate that data and the activities and to feed back into you to let you know which of those data sets you might want to work with. And then at that point, you might be in a place, where you can start to think about the AI solutions that you're gonna feed into. But there's a lot of detail behind this. Obviously not enough time to go into it here. But there's a whole methodology behind it. We've helped customers now being able to put together a solid, data platform that can serve as a foundation, for their AI strategy.
Wonderful, Jim. I took some notes down as you were discussing this framework, and I heard you mention something around making this unified and consolidating. When I talk to customers, they really want the data that is sitting in the cloud, now that it's in the cloud, for us to be able to allow them to get more value out of their data, right? So the APIs that we have to make the data available to other ML and AI services, obviously the API capability that we have. I do hear a lot of customers talking to me about vertical-based AI, specifically around using data from external sources instead of just using trained data. So what you mentioned earlier around retrieval augmented generation or hooks for third-party capabilities like Nasuni, to basically use AI models to build that proprietary knowledge. The first thing you got to do, as you've succinctly mentioned, Jim, is make that data unified, curated, and centralized in a repository. That's my side of the Nasuni house. And then we've got you to come in from the top down and help our customers understand where they can gain the most value out of, leveraging Nasuni as the underlying consolidated services platform to be able to extend files into objects and take advantage of everything we've discussed today. I know we're running out of time, Jim, this has been a great conversation. Every time we talk, I'm always jotting down notes for things that I can parrot to my customers to make myself sound more proficient in the AI space. And one thing, again, for everyone on the webinar here, thank you so much for taking the time. Hopefully what we've done is we've shared with you that Nasuni is one of those solution architectures that is the fundamental building block for how you modernize where you need to be to take advantage of AI. We're here to help. We've done this for hundreds and thousands of customers throughout the years. Jim, I'd like to I'd like to pass it over to you to leave some parting words.
Yeah, I think probably I'll leave it here because I always like to use this slide to give people a real idea of how customers really use Nasuni. So as you can see here, this is the kind of our ending slide. It shows you how Nasuni can feed from those edge devices into a global namespace, and how that global namespace itself becomes available to AI services. But there's a few things I want to just point out. One, it's not unusual for our customers to want to work on similar data sets across branch offices or regions or localities. I call that the data distribution problem. How do you work on similar data sets easily, without some really difficult replication problem? And the way we do that at Nasuni is it's built into our edge devices, and it's transparent in some ways to our end users, very little setup. And it solves many issues for customers. It's in the media space where people want to work on similar data sets, different teams working on different parts. It's in the architecture, engineering, and construction space. It's in the energy space with subsurface data. As soon as you start to do that, you have to start handling the global lock management in the background, which we do. And then you have to start thinking about, oh, well, if branch office one moves the data quickly, works on the data and changes it, how do I get it quickly to branch office two and branch office three, and et cetera, et cetera? And we do that through our global file acceleration, and we move that at speed. And in the background, while all those changes are being made, we're doing the automated snapshot protection. The automated snapshot protection is basically making snapshots of those changes and sending them back into the global file namespace as objects which are immutable. That provides, two things, essentially. It provides you really good ransomware protection. And actually, this is not, we're talking about AI here, not really the security elements of Nasuni, but we can restore millions of files in minutes, not months. It's a beachhead for a lot of the customers who really adopt this architecture. But I would also say that as we move into the agentic AI age, the ability to be able to protect, detect, and restore files at scale is going to be really important, because a lot of those agents are going to work on data that's generated at the edge, and they're going to get embedded in the business value chains, both front and back office. And actually, if anything happens to them through a threat actor, you're going to want to get that back really quickly, because they're just going to be bedded down. And they're going to really interrupt your business value chain. So the ability to restore at the type of speed Nasuni can is just going to be invaluable as we move into agentic. And then once you've got the global file namespace, the ability to get context across your whole file estate, whether it's in London, Tokyo, Boston, wherever, is immense, because you can just plug that straight into an AI service. And there's a lot of democratized AI RAG services that customers use today. O365 from Microsoft with a semantic kernel with a graph connector, Azure AI Foundry with Copilot Studio, Amazon Bedrock with Amazon Q, Vertex from Google. We don't really care. We don't really care if you're going to use that as on the edge device, with Llama, with Mistral. You can just use the object interface, or you can use the file interface. With just kind of that interoperable, if you like, file data lake that expands your whole global organization to make it easier to get, not only to wrap your data up to make it more available, but just to make it available for these AI services, at pace. And that's it.
Yeah, that's phenomenal, Jim. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is a great slide, and ultimately it covers a couple of things for us. It gets the data into those AI services, but also allows the customer's data to be migrated directly into that repository instead of the traditional, legacy hardware. And then how do we get it to the cloud? So wonderful stuff. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you to all of the participants on the webinar. And Ron, we're going to hand it back over to you.